Well, your calculators all have square root buttons. A few of them have cube root buttons. Some calculators have an nth root button. And it may look like this, nth root of x. And if you learn how to punch that key, you could punch in things like the 17th root of 439. Okay, so some calculators have this. If your calculator doesn't have this key, doesn't matter. You're going to learn how to calculate any radical as we move through this chapter. But there are some which your calculator cannot do, and I need to talk about that. So let's look at this problem. What is, earlier we looked at the square root of 49. What about the square root of negative 49? And you think, well, can't be done. Not with real numbers. Because if it equal to a number, when you square that number, you should get a negative 49. But what happens when you square numbers? You get positives, don't you? Or if you square 0, you get 0. But squaring a number always yields a positive, or 0. Never a negative. That's not quite true. Okay? There are numbers which squared do produce a negative. But we have to introduce a new type of number for that to happen. And I'll just give you a quick glimpse right now. We would call this, this number that we need is letter I. So we would say the square root of 49 is 7 times I. And when you square 7i, you get negative 49. All right. Well, we're going to do that in a future section, study those kinds of numbers. That leads to imaginary numbers, complex numbers. We have to expand our number system for those kinds of problems. But we could say right now that the square root of 49, negative 49 is not a real number. It's not a real number. And again, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just, we haven't introduced the mathematical language to do it yet. And on almost any calculator, if you try that, you'll get an error message. Only the most advanced graphing calculators will actually do this. Okay, now I don't want you to confuse that with a negative on the outside of the radical. That can be done. And this answer is the negative of the square root of 49. It's negative 7. So one thing to be wary of is that the negative does not factor out of a radical, not automatically at least, certainly not in the case of square roots. So you cannot move the negative inside and out of a radical. It just doesn't work. All right, well, sometimes it does. So let's look at this. What if you had the third root or cube root of negative 64? That does have a real answer. It's negative 4. And the reason it is because if you take negative 4, raise it to the third power, you have a negative times a negative times a negative. Multiplying 3 negatives gives you a negative. So you get negative 64. So this number does exist in our real number system. And the difference is that its index is an odd number. And negatives raised to odd powers are negatives. So its bottom line here, as they say, the bottom line is that you do not get a real number when you take an even root of a negative. So for example, if you took the 6th root of negative 8, 6 being even, you can't get a real number for that. But the 5th root of negative 8, that number does exist in the real number system because 5 is odd. So you need to learn that difference there in the radicals.